We welcome in right now the author of his new memoir, Animal, a wrestling legend, George the Animal Steele, whose real name, by the way, is Jim Myers. Hello, sir. How are you?
If you're talking to Jim Myers, I'm doing great. George can be confusing.
Well, first of all, let me just tell you, Saturday mornings, Channel 9 in New York, putting on wrestling. I used to pray that you'd be included in that show when I was growing up as a kid, because there was nothing funnier. There was nothing that made me say, to my mom or whoever was home, come here, look at this, look at this, look at this. I mean, you were a master at what you did.
Well, thank you.
Now, I say that to the Animal. I don't know what kind of high school teacher you were, but I say that to George the Animal Steele. Now, so the rumor was amongst us in Brooklyn that you were a college professor. Now, obviously, it turns out you were a high school teacher. How did you reconcile those two lives, the high school teacher and George the Animal Steele?
That is exactly why we wrote the book Animal. I think I had the wildest, craziest career, both as a school teacher and coach and a professional wrestler that ever existed in the crazy world of wrestling. I mean, it's unbelievable, honestly. And it was all due to the fact that back then we had territories, and the shows in New York and the Northeast did not show in Detroit or Madison Heights, where I coached. So the paths never crossed. But I always left the end of the summertime to go back to teach and coach. I left a lot of money on the table from the wrestling business, but another part of my true love was teaching and coaching football and wrestling.
Yes, that's very obvious by the fact that, as you just stated, you did leave a lot of money on the table, and you did keep going back. What to you? I mean, how did you decide on George the Animal Steele, since your name is Jim, and what led to that persona? What led you? You could have been any character. I mean, I could go run down a list of wrestling names and characters and how they portrayed themselves. Who came up with that and why?
I was making $4,300 a year with 2 children, a third one on the way. I needed a part-time job. I was not a wrestling fan at that time. I was a football guy. And a friend of mine talked me into calling a promoter a couple of beers later when I was looking for a job as a bouncer in a bar. I called the promoter about 12:30, woke him up, and we decided that I would wrestle with a mask on, and they would call me the student, because I didn't want my students to know that I was wrestling.
Right.
And the student wrestled for about 6 years, and become very popular under the mask. Then I was invited to Pittsburgh. Bruno Sammartino, the WWF champion at that time, was in Detroit, wrestling Bulldog Broward. They saw me. They invited me to Pittsburgh to wrestle the champion of the world, Bruno Sammartino. I went there with my mask and my whole thing on, and they said, no. We don't want a masked man. We don't want the student. I didn't want to use Jim Myers because I was still coaching. And somebody else said, well, this is the Steel City. And they said, Jim Steele. I said, no. Somebody else said, George Steele. So that half of my body is only 48 years old.
That's very funny. I think we're looking right now, for those watching on Newsmax.com, we're looking at you with, I think, superstar Billy Graham. Hulk Hogan. I'm sorry, Hulk Hogan. And you're in that little shy stance, and then you unleash into the Animal. Obviously, these things were fixed, right? I mean, how well scripted were they? I mean, down to what?
That's the interesting thing. The business has changed, but we were always a wrestling business. It was never really an honest sport, to be honest with you. We knew who was going to win every time I went in the ring, but we didn't know how we were going to get there. That's the difference between now and then. We weren't scripted. We actually wrestled and did things for real, knowing who was going to win and how we were going to get there. But it was all about, to me, it was a great art. It was almost like theater. You're controlling the audience with what you're doing in the ring. And by the way, they're all the way around the ring. It's not just one side of the stage. And so you gotta really have a feel for when the bad guy, and at first I was one of the worst bad guys of all time, beats up the good guy, Bruno Sammartino, and when's he going to make a comeback to get the crowd to pop, and how are we going to work that into a finish? I mean, it took a lot of thinking. It really did. And it was a real art. It's a little more scripted now, and that's not a knock at today's business. I think the wrestlers today are probably some of the greatest athletes in the world. The difference in my era and them is we were tougher, period.
And you guys really, George, we're talking to George the Animal Steele, whose real name is Jim Myers, author of his memoir, which is unbelievable. I haven't even gotten yet to the fact that George has dyslexia and Crohn's disease, but just the fact that he had lived this double life. But how hurt what about the chairs? When someone went for the chair and it looked like they were banging it over somebody's head, what was really happening?
They were banging it over my head.
Really? So it's wow.
More often, I was banging it over their head.
Wow.
And it hurt.
Wow.
But, it's part of the wrestling, and our fans are really loyal people. And wrestlers give their all with their body just to perform and entertain the wrestling fans who are very, very loyal. One of the things that people don't realize is in the 80s, the WWF at that time, their merchandise was right there with the NFL. Go figure.
That is, yeah.
We're talking huge dollars now.
That's amazing. Okay, so talk a little bit about. I know you married young, and you said you had the family, and that's what led to everything. But talk about you weren't a great student, and you hated your high school. Yet that's the high school you went back to teach at. How did you overcome the dyslexia, and how prominent and prevalent was the Crohn's disease?
Well, they give me 6 months to live in 1990.
Wow.
For the Crohn's, the learning disability. I'm going to tell you why I wrote the book, what I've learned from writing a book.
Yeah, please.
That's the best way to cover it.
Sure.
You start going at my life, and it doesn't make any sense in a lot of ways. I'm in wrestling. I wasn't a wrestling fan, but here I am, one of the superstars. You start looking at your life in the rear view mirror when you're writing a book. And what I started to visualize as we're writing this, and I'm looking back, wow, how did I get out of high school? How did I get into Michigan State? How did I get a wife like my wife Pat, who's an angel? How did I get into wrestling? How did I get Crohn's disease? There's no cure for it. I'm cured. How does all this happen? You start looking in the mirror, and you start seeing where God is touching your life before I recognized Him. It's unbelievable how it's led me to my faith, which is huge, and that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, honestly. And I don't slam that in people's faces. It took me, when I was wrestling, if you come up to me and said, "How are you with Jesus?" My reaction is, "Oh, it's up to you."
Yeah.
Right in their face. So,
yeah.
I'm not selling that. I'm just telling you what happened to me.
Well, that is it. You are an amazing story. You are an amazing entertainer and an amazing athlete. And I say this because you were part of my childhood and young adulthood. I watched you in the 70s and the 80s, like I said, as much as I could. And hearing now that so much of it was, I could see the sweat, I could see the physical ability, but I had no idea that a lot of the hurt was real. Now I do know that the hurt was real. And overcoming the learning disability to go back and to be a high school teacher, you're right. It's all God. I could document. There are so many legitimate reasons that I should not be sitting here, except for my parents and God, and instances that if I ever do write a book would be revealed, that I think we all, if we look within ourselves and who we are and how we got to where we are, it would be almost the same kind of tale, correct?
Well, my point for the whole book is everybody should write. Everybody's got a story. Everybody should write a book. People might not buy it. That's not the important thing. It's how you learn to look at your life through the rearview mirror, and other people can look at your life and learn from you. And each and every one of us have that ability.
That's true. Hey, did you throw out the first ball? Was it Fenway Park not too long ago?
Fenway Park last year. Yeah, absolutely. Last year.
I saw
Thank
that.
God there was no Yankee fans there.
So you're a Red Sox fan?
No, they invited me because it was the 100th year of Fenway Park, and we had a wrestling show there back in the 60s.
Oh, okay. So who do you root for in baseball?
The Detroit Tigers.
I should have known. Michigan, absolutely. and not a bad team to root for with some pretty good ball players on there. What do you think of, you talk about the athletes today in wrestling. What do you think of, like, the steroid issue, the performance-enhancing drugs? Was that prevalent at all during your time or not?
No, I didn't even know what it was. But the bottom line is we get a lot of media talking about young wrestlers dying because of the steroids. That's a false That's a false story. They are dying because of pain pills, prescribed pain pills. They get hooked on them and get a few drinks, and that's what whacks them out. Baseball's had trouble with steroids. Football's had trouble. Wrestling's been there too, all of us. But how many people have died in football or baseball? None, really. Maybe one, Azito years ago. But in wrestling, we've had a lot of young people because they do get hurt. They're on pain pills. Sometimes they know they're going to get hurt, and they take a pain pill before they go to the ring. And then once you get all excited and you're fired up, you don't go back to your room and go to bed. You go out and have a couple of drinks.
And the
terrible
mixture.
combination.
Yeah.
It kills people, and there's no need for it.
Very, very interesting. Well, George, listen, it has been a pleasure talking to you, sir, and I wish you nothing but the best of success. I can't tell you, when I tweeted out and put on Facebook that you were coming on, it was like the responses came. Hide the turnbuckle. I hope he's not going to hit you. I don't say anything to get him mad. It's like, out of all the guests, and this is basically a political show, I got the most response to the fact that I was having you on, and I think that should mean a lot to you. Thank you very much. The book is Animal, a memoir by George the Animal Steele. Thank you, sir.